It is maybe -3 outside, and wind chill of about -27. So these are very hearty people who have come out on a cold night like tonight, even though they knew that they could stay at home and watch this on YouTube sometime. Now, just in case that Ted doesn't go, I'm going to record it audio as well. All right, so it's a red thingy there. All right, so this is the format for this evening. We'll go until, we're going to have 2 classes tonight. So the first one will go till 8 o'clock. If you need to leave to get the girls to bed, that's fine, do so. You can catch it on YouTube. And then we'll take a break, about a 5-minute break, and then we'll do the second lesson. We're going to talk about the ABCs of Orthodox spirituality. But Valerie and Angelina, this is going to be nothing like the ABCs that you learn at school. Now I could say biblical as well. And I do mean by that I do mean to assert that the spirituality of the Orthodox Church is the spirituality of the Bible. And the spirituality of the Bible is the spirituality of the Orthodox Church. Tonight we're going to go look at the A of Orthodox spirituality. Let me set out the ABCs real quick to orient you, to set out the territory, and then we'll go back to the A. Okay, the A is, we're going to say, it is the Spirit, small s. The Spirit, even the heart. The B is the Exodus. And we'll say that the B is that salvation is the Exodus. Another hearty soul. And the C is we'll call it the 3 churches. Although it's not really, I don't know. It's not really 3 churches. It's really the 3, let's say the 3-layered church. Because this is one church, right? But it has 3 courts, if you will. There's the narthex in the back, that's the outer court. This area here is called the nave, and that area behind the iconostas is called the sanctuary. So this is one church, but it's distinguishable into 3 different courts or areas. So these are the ABCs of the Orthodox biblical spirituality. This evening, we're going to start with A, the Spirit or the heart. All 3 of these go together. All 3 of them go together. And Erica, open your Bible and find the letter A. Any letter A. That's just one letter, right? So look how big the Bible is compared to that one letter. So the one letter A is in the Bible, and it's an important letter in the Bible, but it doesn't even begin to tell the story. So that's what these letters are like. We're going to talk about the Spirit or the heart, and I feel that even what little we'll have time to set out this evening, even though it will be, I find it very compelling, very beautiful. I find that it resonates and it has a great depth. The fact is that it's just a little tiny part of the picture. And I get excited, I'm anxious to share with you the whole shebang all at once, and I have to constrain myself and just keep it at the letter A without going into all of the things that I'd like to get into, and so that you can experience the excitement with me. But I think that we will, hopefully we will see enough this evening. Okay. I'm going to begin by setting out a map of man. And then we'll go back and we will develop the understanding of man. With the map in front of us, it will make the commentary that I want to make, it'll make the points I want to make in that commentary easier to make, easier to understand. This is a diagram, this is a map, a diagram, an analysis of the human person that has come down to us over the centuries from hoary antiquity. It's perhaps more articulated, more clarified than it was, let's say, in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the church, or even the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries BC. Because actually it was around the 400s, 500 BCs when, at least in Western civilization, and I think you could say also in Eastern civilization as well, because there was a lot of commerce. There was commerce. There was interconnection between the East and West. I mean, the Mediterranean and India, China, Persia. You know, there was the Silk, the China, the Silk Route. Is that what it's called?
Silk Road.
Silk Road, right? And so there was exchange of ideas back and forth, and they cross-fertilized each other. But I think it's fair to say that maybe even go back to 800 BC. We begin to see evidence in the literature that's come down of a growing, it seems to be a growing and developing awareness, sense of the inner world of man. And it took several centuries for the philosophers and the priests and the sages, the contemplatives, to articulate what they were seeing. Now, the point there, the important point there is this, that what we're setting out in this map is not the invention of the church. It's not something that the church threw out of thin air. This is something that's there. And anybody who goes looking for it can see it, can find it. It's there. So these contemplative sages, philosophers, priests, prophets, as they're describing the inner world or trying to lay it out, they're not inventing anything. They're not making up anything. They're simply trying to describe what they see inside of themselves. Now, Erica, you're going to have to help Valerie and Angelina, because when I say the inner world, I'm not talking about your bones or your muscles or your organs or your tissues. I'm not talking about your blood that's going on inside of you. All of that is actually part of the outer world. We're talking about the inner world that cannot be seen, cannot be measured, cannot be touched, but it can be felt. But anyway, we'll get into that. Okay. So here's the diagram that I want to draw for you. And that is standard, if you will. Pretty much standard, at least for the church. And in many ways, it is in common with sources outside the church. First of all, man is divided up into, you can distinguish in yourself, you can distinguish between an outer part, which we can call let's call it the body, just for the fun of it, shall we? The body. And then there's an inner part, an invisible, immaterial, incorporeal part that we call the soul. All right? Now, the body can be divided, of course, into many parts. You got your head, you got your torso, your arms, your legs, And then inside of your body, you've got your organs, your muscles, your tissues, sinews, and all of that stuff. All that's part of the body. You've got your brain, you've got the organs of your heart. It's important to understand that the organ of the heart is part of the body. It's important to understand that because in a moment we're going to be talking about the heart. But we're not talking about the heart organ. We're talking about the inner heart. So, the body and the soul. It's interesting to see in the text, let's say from, about even the 1st, 2nd century BC, you can see, like in the, in Socrates, for example, and the pre-Socratic philosophers, now we're looking, 500, 600 BC. And Philo of Alexandria, I can't remember when he was, like the 1st century BC. So it's interesting to see in the texts, especially when you compare these texts, let's say, to someone like Homer, who, the Iliad and the Odyssey, who is writing in poetry and is expressing the thoughts and the understanding of man at his time. It's interesting to see in the writings of these philosophers and thinkers the evidence that they have discovered something inside of themselves, very, very deep. And they're struggling to find words to describe it. Soul doesn't quite work because, in Greek, the soul is psyche, for example. And in Hebrew or Semitic languages, it's something like nephesh, which is very interesting in itself. We might get into this because nephesh, which we translate as soul, this is the Hebrew word for soul, that we translate as soul, actually refers to the throat. So in the Hebrew, when it says that God made man into a living soul, the word in Hebrew is a living nephesh, which means that he made him into a living throat, which is a beautiful image, actually. Because if you are a throat, a living throat, nose, mouth, what is that saying about what you need in order to live? Breath. You need breath, you need food, you need drink. That's how you live. You can spiritualize that. I remember what the Lord says to his disciples when they come to him after he's talking to the woman at the well in Samaria, the Samaritan woman. He says, "My food is to do the will of God." It's interesting that I'm getting caught already, in one of these fascinating side chambers. I'm sorry. So you read in the Genesis, God made man and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And man, it says, became a living nose, a living throat, a living mouth, meaning that he was made to eat, drink, and breathe the Spirit of God. So now, when you understand that, the commandment that God gives to Adam and Eve becomes all the more significant. What does the commandment have to do with? Eating. Yes. What are you going to eat? You're going to eat from the tree of the good and evil, which would represent the world? Or are you going to eat from the tree of life, which in the Bible represents Torah, or the law of God? And then, of course, it represents wisdom, the wisdom of God. And, of course, in the New Testament, we understand that Christ is the wisdom of God. So he's the tree of life that they were commanded to eat, and they chose not to. So anyhow, okay, back into the main room. To use these words doesn't really quite work because they're seeing something that's even deeper than, and in Greek, psyche simply refers to, it's like it refers to the fluids, the living fluids, the sperm that's flowing through, especially of course the male body, but also the female has living fluids that are flowing through her. These are what's called the psyche, the soul. So these words don't quite work to describe what they're seeing inside themselves as they go into deep meditation. And so they're looking for other words. And one of the words that strikes me that is Philo of Alexandria's word. He sees something deep down, and he calls it the soul of my soul. The soul of the soul. So an invisible part that's in the invisible part. If I may go back to India, go back to, we've not been there yet, but if I can go over to India, there's this phrase it's called the Svetasvatara Upanishad. It talks about the unmanifest. You know what unmanifest means? Invisible, inexpressible. It's so hidden that it can't be you can't be seen, can't be expressed. It talks about the unmanifest beyond the unmanifest. That's Brahman. That's the one. So what I'm driving at is that here's ancient man, for under whatever impetus, who knows? It's a fascinating topic to just, speculate. What is it that was the impetus for man kind of waking up and starting to become more aware of himself inside? Under this impetus, you can see ancient man coming to a greater awareness, a deeper awareness of an inner world inside of him. He's not just this body walking around. There's an inner world. Okay, well, over the centuries, as the thinking becomes more and more refined, this is the diagram. I'm going to draw the diagram that has come down to us. It's kind of the, you might say, the net result of centuries of rigorous effort to describe the inner world. And this is how the church sees it. And in this, I don't think the church is much different than most any other religious, religious religion. The soul, the inner part of you, can also be divided or analyzed into different parts, which are called, generally speaking, there's the desiring part. In other words, when you look in your soul, when you feel in your soul, you can distinguish that there is something in you. There's desire in you. This could be, eros, erotic desire. This desire to, come out of yourself and to find someone you can unite to, become one with. So desiring means yearning, love, yearning for another, to become one with another, to become yearning for a beloved. And then another part is called the emotional. There's an emotional element in your soul, and so that you can distinguish between what you desire, and then the emotions that are excited by different things, excited by desire, excited by different things that happen to you. Like anger, sadness, joy, happiness, elation, all those things, all those emotions. All right? But then you can also distinguish a thinking part in you. I don't know, you can say that this is you can call this the mind. That part of your inner world, that is the provenance of thoughts. Thoughts. This is the organ, the thinking, the mind, that has the capacity to think, to engage in deep thought, and coming up, for example, with logic. The way that you would develop the mind in you is exactly what Valerie and Angelina are doing, and what we did when we were younger. You go to school and you learn your ABCs. You learn your mathematical facts. 5 plus 5 equals 10. 6 plus 6 equals 12. 3 plus 7 equals... Oh, good. That's what I used to teach 4th grade. Did you know that? And that's what I would do with my kids. We'd be standing in line for recess and we would rehearse our math facts. I call out 7 plus 4. Okay, very good. See, you're exercising your mind. This is a very fascinating area as well. Because as ancient man, he was not just becoming awakened to his inner world. He was also, and probably preceding the awakening of his inner world, he was also studying the sky and the stars, the planets, and the movements of the sun and the moon and all of these things. And as he charted these movements, ancient man observed that these movements of the heavenly creatures move according to precise ratios and geometrical relationships. And they noticed, furthermore, that these same relationships, these same mathematical, geometrical, rationic, whatever the word is, ratio type relationships was also to be found in sound. The scale went up according to a precise, mathematical, geometrical ratio. And so they could see from all of this, that the universe around them, both in space and in time, it all moved according to geometrical, mathematical ratios and precision. And so they could see from that in order they could see from that there is a unity, even a oneness, an essential oneness between the movements of the heavens, the movement of the musical scale, and the mind. They all function, as it were, according to numbers, mathematics. And so, the early philosophers, in order to exercise their mind and to develop their mind, to cultivate their mind so that they could contemplate ultimate reality, which they felt was expressed in the movement of the stars and the seasons, observing how the years, the seasons are moved according to a almost precise mathematical formula. They learned, they held up as the highest disciplines for the mind to learn geometry and music theory. If you can learn geometry and music theory, you are equipped to become a philosopher and to contemplate the essence of the universe, to contemplate what is it that makes everything to be what it is. What is it that makes me? What is it that makes man to be man and not a horse, not a cow? So this, of course, elevated the mind and the experience of the mind, the thinking part of the soul, to a very high degree, a very high status, such that the mind in us was considered to be divine, of the same essence as God, whatever you call God, whatever you think God is. Because everything is governed by numerical, geometrical relationships and ratios. Now, you don't have to worry about whether you followed all of that, although I'm sure that you found it fascinating, even if you didn't follow it. But you don't have to worry about following it, because there's a very simple point that I'm wanting to make with all of that. I'm developing it because I want you to understand that this, what we're just talking about, is talking about, it's referring to the thinking part of the soul, or even the mind. But in biblical anthropology, the biblical understanding of man, this which was considered to be the deepest part of man in so much of pagan philosophy was understood to be still on the outer realm, the outer sphere of the human being. There's something deeper. Something deeper. And that something deeper, embedded deep in the soul, is the heart. What the Bible calls the heart. And so you could, where are you going to put the heart? Is it a third part of the soul, or of the human being? It's nestled deep in the soul, so it's like the center of the soul. Whatever it is, here's what Jeremiah the prophet has to say about the heart, according to the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, which was done, 200-300 BC. He says in Jeremiah chapter 17, he says, "The heart is deep beyond all things, and it is the man. Who can know him? The Lord, try the hearts and prove the reins, to give to everyone according to his ways and according to the fruits of his devices." There was a philosopher by the name of Heraclitus who said something very similar. What does he say? The soul is bottomless, or something like. I can't call it to mind right quick, but it's very similar to this. The soul is very deep. It's very deep, and you cannot fathom it. So Heraclitus also saw something even beyond the mind, unless he was thinking about the mind when he said that. Was he thinking about this, or was he thinking about the mind that is in the soul? I don't know. Lao Tzu in China, the ancient sage in China, in his beautiful poems, the Tao Te Ching, some of the most beautiful literature you're going to read, talks about the way as being the mother of all things, and it is very deep, at the root of all things. What are they talking about? Well, see, at this point, there's no firm language, there's no firm vocabulary to use to describe what you're trying to bring forth, so that to express, such that it's virtually impossible for the reader to know what you're talking about unless the reader himself has seen it. And only then does he know what you're trying to say. But at any rate, all of this is evidence that ancient man was able to see, by going inside of himself, he's able to see that beyond the body, and even beyond the soul as this living fluid that perpetuates life, generates life, and takes life back and then regenerates life, there is something even deeper, which they call the heart, but they also called it by other terms. They called it by such terms as spirit. In the Bible there are other terms even yet that they use to describe this deep self. Because at this point, they did not have the word self, interestingly enough. They did not have the word self. In other words, they did not have this word self that has the same kind of content that we now associate with the self. But in the Bible, for example, you can see efforts to talk about this very deep part when they say, when they talk about my heart, my soul thirsts for thee, my heart longs for thee, O God. what are they saying there? There's good reason to think perhaps that when they say my heart, my soul, they're discerning that even with the heart, as deep, we've gotten very deep, even with the heart, there is still distinguishable something else that is equally deep, and they call that my heart. So that there's me, and there's the heart that belongs to me, that expresses me. So that there's already evidence of an experience of myself as being centered, rooted in my heart, which is not the organ of the heart. It's not the bodily organ. It's this invisible, immaterial, incorporeal something about me that is very, very, very deep, even at the very root of my being, such that the prophet can say, the heart is deep. How deep is it? It's beyond all things. So it's beyond the body. It's beyond the soul. It's beyond feelings, beyond emotions. It's beyond desire, beyond even thinking. There's something in us that is very, very deep. And the question is, how do you find this heart? How do you cultivate it? How do you foster it? So let's do this. Let's take this and draw it into a picture. It will be easier to see. There's the body. And then there's the soul. And then there's the feeling part. There's the desiring part. There's the thinking part. And then there's the heart at the very center. So here we have body. Here we have the soul. Then we have the soul divided into what we say, desiring, feeling, thinking, okay, and the heart. Now, there is in all of this, there is the sense of self, right? You have a consciousness of a self, so that you can talk about my soul, my desire, my longing, my body. This self, what do we call it? Well, the Greek word for self is ego. So we call it the ego. So let's call it the ego. And I think we could say that this ego extends throughout all the parts of ourselves. But here it is in biblical terminology, in biblical thought. There is another word for the ego as it is created, as it was originally created, as it originally came into being. And that the word is spirit. The spirit is the contemplative faculty of the heart, or the thinking faculty of the heart. It's in the heart and the spirit of the heart where the image of God is centered. It's in the heart that we can see God. It's in the heart that we open unto God. It's in the heart that we know God, not discursively, but immediately, directly. However, it's the experience of all of us, is it not? that we do not know God. We have to guess. And some of us think there's a God, some of us think there isn't. Something's happened. I mean, if this is true, something's happened to the spirit, something has happened to the heart, such that we can't see God anymore. We can't sense God anymore. We become blind, we become deadened to God. And I'm thinking that the ego is the spirit that has, and I'm going to say that the spirit, this thinking part of the heart, the contemplative faculty of the heart, I'm going to say that it is the movement of the heart. It's the heart in movement. So in other words, the spirit is the spirit by definition is something that moves. And so the spirit is the heart moving out of herself and then into herself, out of herself, into herself, and this movement of love, erotic love, moving out of herself, looking for a beloved, breathing into herself to draw the beloved into her, back and forth, back and forth. So that this spirit chose, and this is what the story of the fall is all about. But it's not just that it was Adam's spirit that chose. The mystery is that each and every one of us make this choice deep inside of ourselves. And the choice is to turn away from the heart and move outward to the body. And when that happens, I'm thinking that the spirit dies. And it becomes, if you will, the ego. And the ego then is the shriveled spirit. The spirit shriveled up. The spirit dried up. The spirit blinded. The spirit darkened. That's the ego. And as the spirit becomes an ego, having turned away from the heart, many things get lost. Many things get overlooked. Let's say that waste develops and there is created within the soul a sewer. I'm calling it a sewer, but modern psychology calls it the unconscious or the subconscious. That part of our soul that we don't know, that is blind to us. So the interesting part here is that not only have we lost sight of God because we've turned away from within, we're not going within, but we've also lost sight of ourselves. There's an unconscious that we don't know, that's influencing us, is driving us, all these unconscious impulses, gathered over the years from our history, our relationships, and all the baggage that we've accumulated from the hurts, the angers, the wounds that have inflicted us. And we don't know how to deal with them, so we suppress them, or we repress them, or whatever. But we just stuff them down there so that we can go on. And so slowly the sewer gets bigger and bigger and bigger, if you will. So this is a picture then of how we are now, how we're supposed to be, what we were supposed to be, and how we have become the way we are. We become blind people. And what's interesting is that until you stop and start thinking about things like this, you just continue to go blithely through the world, through the days of your world, as if everything's just fine. But but you're actually asleep. You're blind to yourself. You don't know who you are. There's this depth of this unconscious depth in you that you're not aware of. But that's influencing you in ways that you don't even know. You're separated from yourself. You're this way when you're in this setting. You're this way, and when you're in that setting, you have all kinds of different faces, all kinds of different masks that you wear, depending on where you are, who you're with. We don't know who we are. So this is the picture of that is given to us from the church, and when we this is the last point that I'll make, and then I'll pause here, and I do have more that I want to say about this, and I'll pause, but you might have and give you an opportunity to make some comments or ask some questions, and also help me to kind of reset here. But the ego, the spirit, as it moves away from her depths, it's easy for her to get caught up. Now she's an ego. The spirit she's shrunk. She's shriveled up. She's become very small. Now she's the ego, the self. It's very easy for her to get caught up in the thinking part of the soul. And so now she becomes all obsessed with ideas, philosophy, speculation, science. That's all she can see. And she concludes that that's all there is. Just like the ancient philosophers. Mind is the ultimate reality. Because the spirit has turned away from the heart, and now the spirit is caught up in herself and is becoming an ego. Or if you're not so sophisticated as a philosopher or as a mathematician, the ego can get caught up in feeling. We get caught up in our feelings. And I become whatever I'm feeling that day. Or we get caught up in our desire, and we become obsessed, we become addicted, to desire. It's trying to slake our thirst, our erotic thirst for a beloved to become one with. And it's interesting to me that in all of these things, the spirit, as she turns away from her heart, you see how her orientation now is all the way, is completely towards the body. And now she measures, the self, the ego, measures reality according to what she thinks, according to what she feels, desires, or according to what she sees, the body. So this is the state of human wisdom. It's what human education fosters and cultivates. It has nothing to do with the heart. And if you hear of the heart in worldly wisdom, what do you think of? Sentimentality.
More so the feeling.
Yeah. That's what you think of when you think of heart. So, what I'm asking you to observe here is that what the biblical understanding or proclamation of man is telling us is that there's a part in you that you have lost sight of, or that you have become separated from. And you're not going to find it. You're not going to find it by learning mathematics or music theory. You're not going to find it by studying more and more science. You're not going to find it by studying the philosophers. You're not going to find it. Because all of those disciplines are caught up in the outer regions of the soul. The only way that you're going to find the heart is by, in the biblical term, is repentance, which means to turn around. So, with your senses, with yourself, we need to turn around and begin to make our orientation, direct our orientation inward. But how on earth are you going to do that? And when you direct your orientation inward, where are you going to go? How do you know where to go? And when you direct your orientation inward, how can you be sure that you don't get deceived or caught up or deluded? We believe that there are spirits going all around in here, How can you be sure that you're not being caught up by a spirit that's taking you away? You think you're going to your heart, but here comes a deceiving spirit, and he catches you, he seduces you, and takes you away from your heart onto a path that leads quite somewhere else. So, here's the conundrum. Here's the puzzle that we're in. Who am I? Where did I come from? How am I going to find the answer? And once I hear the answer, how am I going to get to it? All right, let me pause there. Let me pause there. And we'll take another 7 minutes, let's say, for questions, comments, observations, if there are any. And then we'll take a 5-minute break, and we'll go into next session, and we'll continue this thought. Do you have any questions, observations, comments, or reactions? Do you understand what we're saying here? That's my first concern. Do you understand it? Does it make sense? I'm not expecting Valerie and Angelina to understand it, but nonetheless, you're getting these words. And even though you may not understand them, you're hearing them. And as your mind and soul develop, as you grow older, these words might stick with you, and you might remember some of these things that you're hearing, and then they'll start to make sense to you as you begin to experience life more deeply, more authentically, more spiritually. Then these words might begin to make sense to you. Matthew?
Could the heart, the most inner part, also be called the noetic, or is that a different
Okay.
aspect?
Okay. Yes, the word for spirit that you find, that is in the Greek, is the word nous, which translated into English can mean mind. And as I understand it, this is where it can get confusing, because the mind, which is the nous, is not the mind of the soul. Well, somebody listening over here might say, Father Paul, you're all wrong. Well, I don't know that. This is best I understand it. The mind, the nous, is the contemplative faculty of the heart. So it's distinguished from the contemplative or the thinking faculty of the soul. The thinking faculty of the soul does mathematics. It does science. It does music theory. It thinks in terms of logic. The contemplative faculty of the heart, the nous, knows, not through dialectic. You know what dialectic means? How would you explain it? Yes, no, this, that, if, therefore. Does that sound right, Kelvin? Okay. That's dialectical. In other words, through deduction, induction, inference. That's how the thinking part of the soul knows. But the contemplative faculty of the heart knows immediately. It knows, and in fact, in the Holy Fathers, the Greek Holy Fathers, when they're describing the knowledge of the nous, or the intellect of the heart, they use a word that we translate into English as aesthetics. I think I mentioned this in the sermon on Sunday. We translate it into English as something like aesthetics. So that the word for knowledge that the Fathers use to describe the knowledge of the contemplative faculty of the heart is a word that means it's a sensory perception. Most of the times when you come across this word in the Greek, you'll see that it's translated as consciousness or awareness. But that's an inadequate translation, because consciousness or awareness carries only a kind of an intellective, a mental connotation. But aesthetic, what the Fathers are trying to say is that this isn't just a purely cerebral understanding. This is a knowledge that you feel. You feel it in an unfeeling way. You feel it, the heart feels it. I think, and I don't know that this has to be so esoteric. I would say that you have an experience of the contemplative faculty of your heart, your nous, when you're having a mother-daughter moment. And you know she's your mom. You just know. That goes beyond the brain. You just know it down in here. That's an example of the contemplative faculty and of the heart. And in the same way, the heart, when she has been purified, she knows God, not as an idea, not as a postulate, not as a possibility, or as a hypothesis. She knows God. She knows Him immediately. So yes, that's the noetic, the spirit and the nous. That's the noetic. But you see, the noetic or the spirit is like it's the thinking part of the heart. So the heart is the chamber.
Noetic is?
Yes.
Okay.
It's the faculty of the heart.
Okay.
Erica.
Talks about people feeling like, I would imagine that at some point your heart starts to know when your spirit is oriented away outward toward the body,
Mm-hmm.
and you think that maybe you're turning back toward your heart,
Mm-hmm.
toward God,
Mm-hmm.
but there could be deceiving spirits.
Yes.
So how do you even if you say, no, I want to join the church,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm having all of these thoughts, and they feel like they're from God.
Mm-hmm.
I'm contemplating something.
Mm-hmm.
It seems spiritual, or I can find something in the Bible that kind of aligns with it. But you could be being deceived. So how do you know when you're going back to that thinking,
Yeah.
of the Spirit,
Yeah.
and the news that you're talking about,
Yes.
the contemplating thinking?
Well, the way that you're using the terms tells me that you understood what we said here.
Meant a lot to me.
But that is like the $1,000,000 question. And everyone, even me, an Orthodox priest, I have to be on constant guard that I'm not being deceived. And it can be very hard. Because the ego, the spirit that has fallen to become the ego, the shriveled up ego, you understand? The nature of the spirit is open. She loves God. She has no desire to be God. The ego is the spirit that has closed in on itself in its desire to become God. Why did Eve want to eat from the tree? Because it would open her eyes and she would come to know evil, good and evil, and she'd be as a god. Well, we were created to be gods, actually, but we were not created to be gods alongside God, in competition with God. We were not created to be our own gods. And so the ego is so vain and self-centered. I still struggle with vainglory. I still struggle with it. In fact, I struggle mightily with it. It's like a fever. And I can see that I'm vain and that I'm vainglorious, but there's nothing I can do about it because it's like a fever. It's like having the fever and knowing that you've got a temperature of 104, but there's nothing you can do about it. So you fight. But that's why we need the guidance of the church. And that's why it's so important that the church is the body of Christ and not the body of some human's idea of God. The only one who can teach me is Christ. And so that's why the Orthodox Church is so uptight about doctrine. If the doctrine is false, it's going to lead you away. And it becomes, and then the church becomes Luther's idea of God, Wesley's idea of God, Phineas F. Brazie's, John Calvin's idea of God. And for those of us who don't give a rip for John Calvin's God or Martin Luther's God, that's not good enough for us. We want the real deal. So you might say that, and what does the Lord say? Whoever would be my disciple, let him deny himself and take up his cross and lose his life for my sake. That means to let go of the ego, but good luck. So you might say that this is the struggle that we're fighting our whole life. But this is what it means to die in Christ. Every day I'm dying more and more to the ego, and I've got to be aware of that ego always wanting to pop up. Because the minute I stop being aware, it's going to pop up, and I'm going to get caught up into back up into that vainglorious cloud, and I'm going to stop taking up my cross. I'm going to drop the cross. I'm not going to be denying myself anymore. But the soul who is sincere in finding God attracts God. And he comes to her. And in the church, we are taught how to do this fight, what to look for. In the church, we have the sacraments, which we don't believe are memorials. The bread and wine we believe is the actual body and blood of Christ. Baptism actually unites you to Christ. It's not just a symbol. It unites you to Christ, to his death and to his resurrection. And so through the sacraments of the church, God is coming to us. God himself is coming to us. He's coming to us in a physical, tangible, concrete way. You can touch him. You're eating him. You're drinking him. You know, the nephesh, the soul. You're eating and drinking him. And so he's in us by virtue of the sacraments. He has come to us. Now I must turn and make my way towards him. But see, he's not out there anymore. He's hiding, if you will, in me. How am I going to find him? I have to cultivate the heart through faith. But faith isn't just believing. Faith is doing this work of crucifying my ego for the sake of Christ. Valerie, what's your question?
Why do we eat the bread and body of Christ?
So that he becomes our food and drink. You become what you eat and drink, right? It makes you strong. If you didn't eat and drink, what would happen to you? You die. Well, God makes himself our food and drink. This is a mystery, Valerie. It's a mystery. It's not blood like my blood, because the body and blood that we're of Christ that we're eating and drinking is the body and blood of Christ that was crucified, dead, and buried, and is now risen from the dead. It's not an earthly body anymore. You might say that the bread and the wine become the concretization, the incarnation, you might say, of Christ in all of his richness. Christ as joy. Christ as sweetness. Christ as beauty. I don't mean small b, I mean capital B. So when we're eating and drinking the body and blood of Christ, we're eating and drinking beauty. We're eating and drinking joy that is not of this world. It's not of this world. And you're not required to understand it. I don't understand it. But again, how do we know? See, this is the thing. All of these so-called Christian churches, they got caught up in their head, and they started trying to understand how the bread and the wine become the body and blood of Christ, and they couldn't figure it out. So what did they do? They said, well, it must not be the body and blood of Christ. So they said, it's this, it's that, it's a memorial, it's an emblem, but it's not really. And it's interesting that the only church left that still believes that is the body and blood of Christ is the Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. But then I think even the Romans are starting to back away from that in some places because of all the nonsense that's going in the Roman Church. They're starting to fall away from that. So how do we know it? Because we can figure it out? No. Because when we eat and drink the body and blood of Christ, and when we live the life of Christ that we are taught to live by his church, we experience transformation. We experience cleansing. We experience sweetness. We experience joy that we know is not of this world. So we know it's the body and blood of Christ because of what we know in our heart. Not because we can figure it out, but because we know it. You're going to have to think about that, huh? Or maybe not think about it. Just do it. And what should you do if you want to find the body and blood of Christ in this way? I'll tell you what you need to do. Love your mom. Obey your mom. Respect your mom. That's what you and Angelina can do. That's what you're supposed to do. That's how you take up your cross.
To your question before, I remember St. Cyril once said that if you're going in a direction where you are not cultivating love for your enemies, then that's how you know that you're being deceived.
Excellent. Thank you.
That was kind of like the ultimate.
No, not kind of, Blake. It is. No, that is the mark. That is the mark. Love for one's enemy. Then you know that it's from God. Love for your enemy.
Yeah, because there's no way a demon is going to
No.
love your enemy.
No. So if you can't love I don't love my enemies. I have some enemies, and I don't love them at all. So I do what I can. What do? I pray for them. There's some who are so repulsive to me, it's hard for me even to say their name. But I still say their name. I force myself to say their name. I can do that much. So I am obedient to the degree that I can be obedient. And as I am obedient to that degree, that obedience can grow. and that love for the enemy can grow. All right, well, we need to take a break. Make sure, and so we don't use it up. Yeah, turn it off. Let's hope it took.